Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Jackie Drew, and I'm president of the IPT-HOPE network. And we have the great fortune today of having Cathy Bulley coming to present for us, and she's going to be talking about convincing people how to put together a good presentation once your abstract is accepted. We are recording this so that it will be available for people that want to check it or double check it at a later time. I'm actually going to turn my camera off so that I'm not intrusive here, and I'm going to let Cathy take over. So welcome, Cathy. I'm so glad you're here to present.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much for well, asking me to do it for one thing, and for anyone who's joined us or who's joining later by watching the recording. I'm hoping that this presentation, it's kind of more of an online seminar, so webinar. I hope it'll give everyone something either new or a reminder, something that helps you to just move forward a bit in preparing your presentations. So I was going to say congratulations to those who got their abstracts submitted for WCPT, but there'll be others who have other presentations coming up, or just have other types of presentation that you want to do, so you may get something from that. The focus is on academic conferences, but there will be some transferable learning to other situations as well. So I'm aiming to provide you with guidance on presenting orally or in poster format. And I've sourced advice from colleagues. I kind of thought, am I a bit of a fraud? I don't like presenting very much. I get quite nervous. And so I thought, I'm going to talk to a few other colleagues and see if they have, what their top tips are. Because you may find that a lot of people who do a lot of public speaking it's not their favorite place in the world to be. So I've used tips, my own experiences, and I've used online resources. You may notice I haven't got a reference presentation here because it was more bringing together insights. I've put in the names of the people who gave me tips, but I've listed resources at the end because depending on where you are in experience and what type of presentation you might be wanting to do, I think you'll need to go further. So the objectives were to consider the benefits and challenges of poster and oral presentations, to consider what makes a presentation optimal, to discuss practical tips and strategies to highlight ways of preparing yourself beforehand. Practical tips and strategies in general, and to highlight ways of preparing yourself beforehand. Sorry, two different things, but they merge a bit. Ideally, I'd like to make it interactive, productive. I'd like you to be able to have some ideas about what you might do, reflective, and potentially have some sharing of ideas. And that is a bit affected by how many people are able to attend now. So we'll see how that goes. Also affected by my ability to manage the technology and move between the sharing my desktop and the bit where I can see your discussions. So first of all, looking at oral versus poster. Now we talked about this a little bit in the spring presentation on abstract writing, because that's the point where you really get to tick a box that says I prefer oral or I prefer poster. Now that you don't always get that choice, but it's quite nice sometimes to look back and think, okay, what are the relative advantages and disadvantages, and how can I manage the things that make me more nervous, perhaps? So a poster can be quite a nice place to start if you're inexperienced, because there is less pressure, and you've got the greater likelihood of one-to-one interactions, because you often have a timetabled slot to stand by your poster and talk to people. And it's more accessible to people because they can be wandering around the conference and go and see your poster at different times. But the disadvantage can be that there's less information provided. You have to be much, much more focused. And it's possible that people will miss the time where they could talk to you. And so it can be very beneficial. I'll talk a little bit later about one strategy, which is to make sure your contact details are there so that they can easily take away. A platform presentation, to the oral presentation, there is more pressure. It's is more of a performance, really, isn't it? So that can feel stressful, especially if you're new to it, or especially if you're quite a shy person. More people can see you, though. And in terms of identifiability, you're there doing the presentation for a reason. There's something you care enough about to have gone to all this trouble. And so you probably want to progress that work. You probably want to talk to other people who are interested in that work. And so if you're doing a platform presentation, people can identify you and come and speak to you about it. You can usually include a little bit more information in them. And generally, it's considered more prestigious because there are fewer opportunities. There are fewer platform presentations than there are poster spaces. So what I'd rather like now is for a short opportunity for reflection, for you to think back to the last presentation that you've seen. If you were at a conference, think about that. If you haven't been to a conference recently enough, just think back to the last time you heard someone either speaking publicly or displaying information in more of a poster format. So have a think, and if you can use the typing box so that we can have a bit of interactivity, then can you write down oral or poster presentation? And what do you remember? Do you remember something specifically that was really good about it, or something that was really bad about it, or both? So if you can try that, and while you're doing that, I'm going to try to work out how to get back so I can see those comments. So I'm seeing a comment from Jackie saying both oral and written presentations with too many words, not well organized, and not logical. And I can definitely relate to that. I'm not sure there are many other people here right now, so I'm going to carry on. The next point that I had for reflection is, can you remember the last time you did a presentation, either oral or poster? And can you remember thinking about whether you would do anything differently next time? While you're considering that, another comment that Jackie's made is that the speaker didn't prepare and ran out of time, and that she didn't receive the information or the findings. And I think that's another big and easy to make mistake. So a bit more time just to think about what you might do differently. And if you're listening to this later, you could pause it and have a think, because you often forget to reflect on things that you've done before and what you might do differently. So I think it's really worth taking a moment to do that. So Jackie's saying that some of the questions prepared her to make a better paper. So actually, the questions asked by the audience, I'm guessing. So is that what you're saying, that people in the audience asked you questions that helped you to refine your argument or clarify things? So yes, Jackie's saying it's exciting to have others with questions. I think it does. I think it's extremely useful if you're progressing research, for example, in the context of being a PhD student, especially if you've got a Viva coming up. So yes, Jackie's saying it's exciting others have questions as the researchers. It makes you aware of what other work's out there and the needs. Yes, it situates you in a wider context, I think. It makes you part of a whole rather than you can feel like you're working on your own sometimes in isolation, and this doing a presentation really connects you, I think. Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm going to try now to go back to sharing my screen. So if you can give me a moment to sort that out. My problem is I'm sharing the wrong bit of the screen. I'm just going to try to work out how to get back to the right bit. See, it's always daring for me to try to do things like this when I'm not happy with technology overall. But I think we're there. Okay, so that was really helpful, and I think it brings back, it really links up to some of the top tips that people gave me when I went around the department. So, key tips and strategies. Yes, so I consulted multiple colleagues on what their key advice would be on giving presentations, and I've seen their responses as headings. And the first thing I think relates very much to one of the points you made, Jackie. Be selective. Marietta van der Linden, who's a senior research fellow in physiotherapy at Queen Margaret University, said, you're really unlikely to be presenting your whole project. Jane Culpin, who's a senior lecturer in the same department, said, one argument done well. So pick one key message and do it well. And some of this relates back to the kind of advice I was giving in the spring about writing your abstract. And so you might say, well, I've already done that. But there's always a risk when you then come to writing the presentation that you think, oh, well, now I don't just have to have 500 words. Now I can really go for it. And you can't really. You can't just go for it. Look back at the abstract and stay within its parameters. Stay within that key message, okay? Consider carefully how much more is needed beyond the abstract for either a poster or for the oral presentation. Remember these slides from the spring session. You're looking at a nugget of learning. A nugget defined by Wiktionary, which is not something I advise my students to use, but anyway, I liked the definition. A tidbit of something valuable, a nugget of wisdom. That's what I advise you to look for in creating your abstract. And in your presentation, keep it specific to that. And think as well about who your audience is. Who are you trying to convince? And does that affect the level of detail, the kind of explanation you're giving, or the kinds of words you're using? You might use very different language for an audience of service users than you might for an audience of peers, of physiotherapists. But then consider, am I at a conference where everybody is from this local area, where there may not be a problem with accent? Or do I have to be very careful in the words I use and not use colloquialisms? And I would generally recommend don't use colloquialism, don't use local terms, unless, for example, you're presenting qualitative information and it's the words of your participants. And if it's very colloquial, provide an explanation, okay? Don't leave the audience to guess, because you lose your impact. So look very hard at the level of detail, the level of explanation, and the words used. Clear storyline. Again, that links very much back to the point Jackie made from her memories. Make sure there is a clear storyline and make the connections. And Prof Cathy, who's another research fellow in the department, brought this one up. And I don't think the images come out very well, but it's trying to illustrate connecting the dots. You are trying to convince someone of something. You need to make it as easy as possible for them to follow your argument. And what you want, ideally, is that by the end of your presentation, they think, well, of course, that makes absolute sense. Why has nobody ever done this before? So there are no feelings of, just not quite sure I'm with you. You haven't convinced me. So make sure it's a clear storyline. If it's a kind of data-based abstract and presentation, think very hard about what was the key message and what was the research question connected to that key message. Make sure the background fits completely with that and doesn't have any unnecessary points. Make sure that only the data relevant to that are presented, and make sure that you come back to what does that specific data mean and how does it connect to your message. So that's really important. It can be very valuable to ask someone who's not in your area to listen to you, to try it. You practice making the argument to them, and see whether or not they follow your thought process. That can be really valuable if you can convince someone to listen to you, some very good friend. So think hard about what is your burning message. What's the main message? What was the reason for the study or the service evaluation or development? And what do the results mean? You want people to leave with a take-home message, the thing that's going to stick in their minds. Remember that people at a conference are often moving from presentation to presentation to presentation. They probably pack their days. If it's a poster, they're walking along a kind of corridor of posters, and they probably have a list, a menu of everything they want to go and see. So you want yours to stick out. You want yours to stick in their minds. Beginning, middle, and end. Remember, you have a structure. There's a journey through your argument. Remember to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And hopefully your abstract had that, so you can base it around that. So, minimize text. This one, several of my colleagues brought up. Don't include too much on your slides or in your poster. Now, I had a moment when I read, when I wrote these tips, because I'd already done some of the presentation development, and I suddenly thought, it's actually really quite stressful doing a seminar or presentation on how to do a good presentation. You suddenly feel very exposed and vulnerable, and am I actually going to do a good job of this, because am I going to practice what I preach? So I suddenly went back and started minimizing the number of words on my slides. Tavi Jagadama, who happens to be my husband and also a lecturer, he was saying don't include too much on your slides or in your poster. Marietta van der Linden, who I talked about earlier, said readers are lazy, including her. Tavi again emphasized use images for impact. Images can stick in people's minds very, very well. There was actually a nursing lecturer and researcher from the US called Sarah Kagan, who visited our nursing department in Queen Margaret University about 3 weeks ago or so. And she didn't use any text. I think she had headings and then images. And she talked around them. And it was quite interesting because I wasn't trying to read while she talked. I think I listened to her more. Sorry, I'm going to have to pause for a moment. I'm really sorry, but I am being called away for something, and I'm really sorry, but I'll be back in just a moment. I'm back. Sorry, a domestic moment where I left the key in the door and my husband's back with the children and he couldn't get in because the key was in the door, so I'm sorry about that. One of the fun things about technology and doing work from your home. It wouldn't happen if I was in work. But yes, so moving on, use images to create impact. It really can make a big difference. Another colleague called Elaine Coulter, who's a lecturer and has been a researcher for a while as well, said that one guide that she's had before is only have one slide per minute or 1 minute per slide. If you exclude your introductory slides and your acknowledgements, and you've got 10 minutes for your presentation, you really shouldn't have much more than 10 slides for the main content. And she was suggesting no more than 8 words per line, which is when I went back to my PowerPoint and started adapting things. So that is all quite useful. And you can see from the image I picked out there, it's actually, I think, in French, but it's just to illustrate how intimidating it can be to be confronted by lots of text. And you can imagine, especially if somebody's walking through a corridor of posters, they may just not stop and read that one. Impact of the poster. So I'm going to focus on posters for a moment. As I said, people are walking along and they may have highlighted your poster and decided that they specifically want to look at yours. but it may be that they are just wandering, and you can imagine what might draw you in compared to what is less likely to. Think about the design of your poster. Now, it's very, very useful if you happen to have access to a graphic designer. And we're very lucky in QM, we have a very skillful graphic designer called Elspeth Calvert. And she creates really great posters for us. The only problem with it, even if you have access, is that you have to have plans ahead well enough. You need to get it to the person to design it with enough time. And we're often, despite best intentions, much less ahead of time than we wish to be. And so one thing that I found useful in the past is taking a poster that someone's helped me with in the past and adapting it, copy-pasting other information in. That can be quite a useful thing. And if you don't have access to a graphic designer, maybe a collaborator does, and maybe you could use a template of theirs from the past. So that can be quite a useful thing to do. Recognition and reach. Now, this is something I wanted to talk about for a little bit. First of all, even if you're doing a poster, you can be recognized from it. Put your photograph in the poster possibly, so that people could recognize you. Definitely put your contact details in. One thing that I've done, and Kevin reminded me as well as one of his tips in the past, is have a plastic wallet of some kind drawing pinned or stuck to the bottom of your poster, and put lots of copies, maybe just black and white copies of color. If you have lots of a high budget, you could have color copies, A4 copies of your poster with your contact details on. And people can just take them away with them. And that can be very, very convenient so that people have the reminder of the content, but also the contact details. And something I've been having a conversation before the presentation, I've been having a conversation with Jackie about, is that the power of social media is huge. And I am just a very recent and very inexpert convert to it. I think I've been on Facebook for not even a year and Twitter for a few months. But it was actually a professor in the research center I joined who told me to start engaging with social media more. And as I did it, I started to see what power it has. And I've used it in carrying out data collection, but it's more than that. And the thing I will talk about most actually just now is Twitter. We are very lucky in physiotherapy at Queen Margaret University to have Janet Thomas working in the department. She is one of the co-founders of PhysioTalk with Naomi McVeigh, which kind of followed in the footsteps of We Nurses. So nowadays there's We Nurses, PhysioTalk, OT Talk, and I'm sure a variety of others. There's We AHPs, and they follow a general pattern. I'll tell you about PhysioTalks, which is that every 2 weeks they have a very organized tweet chat that lasts an hour between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock in an evening UK time, and it can be very big and it can be international. They have formed a community through this, and that community follows each other throughout the rest of the couple of weeks as well. So you do preparatory work, and it forms excellent continuing professional development because the topics vary and usually are very current. However, what I saw last weekend, not this past weekend, the weekend before, it was the European region of WCPT had their conference in Liverpool in England. And I couldn't go because my husband, who I just allowed in the door, he was there and I had to look after the 2 children. And the Twitter presence of the staff who went, their contacts, and the PhysioTalk community was such that I actually felt like I was there. They were tweeting content of presentations, they were tweeting photographs of themselves next to their posters or just the poster itself, competitions, they were tweeting key messages and beautiful quotes. I got a real sense of what the conference was about, and it was amazing. So what I want to say here, recognition and reach, this is not just about one presentation. This is actually about promoting your work beyond the conference as well. So try to think about that as well. So this is in a sense beyond just the poster, my advice on actual presenting. I'm talking about dissemination more broadly and impact. Think hard about how you might get people along to your poster using social media. Tell people when you're going to be standing by it through Twitter. I'll retweet you now, I know how. So I would really like to see, certainly IPT-HOPE community, having a greater presence on social media to indicate we're here in Cape Town, and this is what we're doing. And then throughout the year, other things that are happening, other presentations, other events, new news. It would be great to see more of that coming out. So in relation to posters and presentations, use social media if you can, or engage somebody who you know, who you're with, who's better at it. Okay, so moving on, what else do you need to check in your presentation? Before you finish writing the presentation itself, poster or PowerPoint, think about referencing, okay? Make sure that you've referenced, you've given credit for any knowledge, and you've got that referencing in the slides, in the poster, and in a reference list at the end. Now you have to be selective in a poster. You really can only pick two very key references because you haven't got space for a big reference list. So be strategic with that. The second thing can be a really big mistake, actually. Have you credited everyone? Now, I have a new PhD student who's a member of staff, and she had an experience recently where she was presenting her master's dissertation results at a conference. And afterwards, her supervisor said, "You didn't include my name in the presentation." And she was, "Oh my goodness, I didn't even realize that was what I should do." She's fairly new to academia. She isn't as aware of the conventions. So I'll say just now, anyone who's collaborated with you, think very, very hard about whether they are a co-author or whether they are someone to acknowledge and say thank you to. So little of the work we do is in isolation. Very little. Does happen, but not often. Most of the time we've had assistance, and so give that thanks and acknowledgement to people and make sure they have that for their files of records of continuing professional development and achievements. Absolutely, definitely include your funders. You'll get into trouble if you don't. So think about whether anyone funded you. If it was unfunded but you have an institution behind you, such as a health service, practice, and a higher education institution, make sure you have their logo as well. So include logos and funders and say thank you. So I think that is a very key point. And when it comes to posters, what you'll often do is use logos at the top. You might have your banner headline and then poster your logos of the most important institutions involved in the work there. And you definitely also include a thank you acknowledgement for any funders and other contributors. Okay. Kelly had another key tip, which was practice, 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 rehearse, 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 and I take that on. And I think that links very much back to one of the other things that Jackie, you were saying about people going overtime. You can't stick to it 10 minutes unless you've practiced. It is key to being able to do a short presentation. If you're doing an hour-long presentation, you don't need to practice as often because you've got more scope. Like for me, I'm looking at my watch going, okay, right, well, I'm further into the hour than I expected to be because I thought this was going to be well short, but I'm obviously being chattier and running off to open doors, so that's taking a bit longer. But when it comes to 10 minutes or 5 minutes, I will practice 5, 10 times beforehand because it helps you, first of all, to keep to the point and not ramble, not just wander in your talking. It helps you, therefore, to keep to the time limit. The more you practice, the more you can speak without looking at any notes. I would never say to someone, don't take notes with you, because it can be a really useful thing to help settle nerves. But you don't want to be reading off them if you can avoid it. If you're extremely nervous, and this is your first presentation, audiences are very forgiving of that. But if you can practice to the point where you can just speak it, make eye contact, engage with the audience, it will be easier for the audience. It's unprofessional to go over the time limit. When we were talking back and we were reflecting on good and bad presentations, I was remembering back to the ones that I've experienced. And I don't think it's the most recent presentation that I've listened to, but the one that sticks out most in my mind, it was actually it was about breast cancer. It was a conference full of medical professionals. And so I think I was even more nervous than I might have been, because I think I felt a bit of a fish out of water. And I sat all morning watching presentations go over time, more and more and more, and I mean 5-10 minutes over time. And the chairperson wasn't controlling that. And as the time went on, I was looking and thinking, but I need to do my presentation still, and it's just before lunch, and nobody's going to want to hear me. And then we got to the slot for the shorter presentations, and the chairperson said, okay, everyone be quick. You know, it's nearly lunchtime. And I thought, that's so unfair. Actually, you should have been managing the earlier ones by cutting people off, but you didn't want to. But it left me in the position of feeling I needed to rush, and I started to fall over myself trying to put it in the time. It probably took longer because I was so anxious about it. So what I would say there is, if I were to do anything differently, reflecting, I would try to compartmentalize what that chairperson said and say, no, I have a time period too, and this is my presentation. However, that's the impact of other people going over their time. A good chairperson will cut you off, and that is not fun. So practice, because it's respectful to others. It means you can get the whole of your message through. If you're doing a poster presentation, have an elevator pitch. I'm not sure if you've heard of that before, but it's something that's used more and more and more now, and it's especially in business, I think. But the idea that you can summarize your key message in, say, 2 minutes, and somebody says, so what are you about, or why are you here, what's your thing, and you can just roll it off at the drop of a hat. You can say, yes, this is what my message is about, this is what I care about, and I've come to say. And that will be very useful if people are wandering around and stop by your poster and ask you, because then they'll understand what you're about, and you can get into the networking, the conversations about what they're doing and how it all relates, and you can start to fit your work into the wider context. Pace, volume, and cadence, I think, are very, very important. Jackie and I were talking earlier about the importance of having a chance to review written work for people who are writing in a language that isn't their own. And we could bring this back up at the end of the presentation, I think, or at the end of me speaking, because there's 2 stages. I think there's the written and there's the spoken. The written matters in the abstract and even getting the chance to present, and it matters in the poster, but it also has an impact on your slides. But this slide is more about speech, so it's more relevant to your oral presentation, but also to when you're talking to people about your poster. Practice speaking slowly. Now, I find when I'm doing a presentation, I can feel like I'm speaking unnaturally slowly. And I do that especially if it's an international audience, because I think I have a clear accent, but actually I've heard from plenty of international students that they don't think I do. It's not actually just about people who have English as a second language being cautious and speaking slowly and being careful, because actually I sometimes find people who are speaking English as a second language easier to understand than some people who have English as a first language but have an accent that is more localized and are not enunciating and are speaking very, very quickly. So I'm not going to isolate any single accent here, because I think that could be unfair. But I'm sure we've all had experiences like that. And I work quite hard at it doing presentations because of working with a lot of international students. And I remember at one conference standing in the lunch queue and one man saying to me, "I really enjoyed your presentation. It's the only one I've understood." And I just thought, wow, oh, that's great. And he said, "You speak very clearly." I thought, I'm really going to try to keep working at that. So enunciate. I don't know if you've noticed, even just on this slide, I found myself being more careful because I'm remembering. Enunciate. It may feel strange to you. If you practice the way I said, it won't feel as strange and it'll come more naturally to you in the moment. Project your voice, even if you feel silly when you're practicing, do it then too. So I did this whole webinar before coming on out loud. There is an aspect of acting around presenting. It is a performance. Practice the performance. So project your voice, even if you feel silly when you're practicing, and modulate your voice. And what I mean by that is if you speak in a monotone and you don't change your tone of voice very much, it tends to send people to sleep because it's just not very interesting and people don't tune in to key messages because they can't really tell what the key message is. I hope I'm illustrating the point. If you modulate your voice, it helps people to understand where is the emphasis. And if you pause, it allows the message to sink in. Now, one of the things I found, another thing that I've experienced in the past, I told you at the start, I'm not a natural presenter. I don't like presenting to large audiences. My favorite thing, one-to-one, small groups, supervision, that kind of thing. But I went into academia, so I have to do it. Now, the thing I found hardest at the start of my career was the short presentations. I used to become so anxious, I would hyperventilate. And I was very fortunate in one of the courses I did, learning to be a better lecturer. We had to do what were called micro-teaching sessions and teach the rest of the group for a short time. And we had a public speaking expert there giving us individualized feedback. And she tended to work with actors and politicians. And she said to me, "You really need to exhale." I hadn't even realized, even as a physiotherapist, that my diaphragm was rigid. I was not allowing any air to escape, and I was becoming more and more hyperinflated trying to speak. And she said, "Look, breathe out. We will wait for you." And I thought, oh, for goodness sake, how did I not even notice that? She said, for you, you probably need to do breathing exercises before you go on. And that really helped. And remembering that actually you can pause, you can stop, exhale, and move on. It can actually help the audience a lot to take in the point that you just made. But practice it so that that time is incorporated in the full time, okay? So for many people who find it more stressful, practice your breathing exercises, use your physiotherapy knowledge. For those who are very confident, you need to practice so that you don't go off on tangents and end up going beyond the time, okay? So, packing your bag. Now, this may seem like I'm being a bit of a mum, and I am, but actually this is about nerves. Plan ahead, and I'll explain a bit more in a moment. What do you need? Make sure you have it available to you. Make sure you have a post-it tube. Make sure you have your directions, your tickets all sorted. If you are presenting an oral presentation, make sure you have an electronic version and backups. Now, I would advise emailing yourself your presentation before you leave, because if something goes wrong with the other versions, you may well be able to access your presentation through email. Cue cards. If it helps you, take your cue cards, dress professionally. Dress yourself, as in, not dress yourself, nobody else is going to dress you necessarily, but dress as yourself. Feel comfortable in what you're wearing, but be professional in that. This isn't, conference presentations are not really jeans and t-shirts type things usually, unless you're just not comfortable in any other outfit, and in that case I'd say go with it. So, managing nerves. Okay, that was part of my packing the bag thing. Try to avoid last-minute panics. If you reach your presentation and you're already at quite a high stress level, it's really very hard to manage the nerves and do a good presentation. So try to prepare beforehand, even if you're a last-minuter, it's really worth it. Try to make sure that you're there in plenty of time. Another way to manage your nerves, if it's something you find particularly stressful, is try to remember why you're doing this. Now, most people presenting at a conference, it's because of something they really care about. And for AHPs, physiotherapists specifically, there's probably a group that you're trying to help. Maybe colleagues, it may be patients, service users of different kinds. You might be trying to convince funders, but there's a reason why you're doing it. Try to tap into that motivation and remember why you're doing it. The audience has chosen to be there. They've chosen to be with you. They've chosen to listen to you. They're ready to be convinced. They're not looking to trip you up, usually. They're not looking for that. And don't assume anyone in the audience is. This is about progressing knowledge, progressing care, progressing service provision, whatever the conference is about. Remember that and why you're there and what you're trying to do. So it's not about being the perfect presenter. You need to be a good enough presenter and get through it. And leave people with that key message, that take-home message. Having some water can be very useful. I don't know if you've ever experienced that tongue sticking to the roof of your mouth moment from the adrenaline. I've had that just before a presentation and then had to kind of unstick yourself, try and feel like you can actually then present. It's not nice. So have a bottle of water with you. Take a couple of sips as the person before is finishing. Smile. That has an impact on you physiologically and on your audience. Smile at your audience. Look at them, scan the room, and smile. And breathe. And that comes back to the things I was talking about earlier. Do some breathing exercises before you get up if you need to. As you're uploading it might be that it takes a moment for your presentation to come up. Instead of getting increasingly anxious, just try doing a few deep breaths and smile at the audience as you're about to introduce yourself. So those are my key points, really. I want to now come off sharing the screen and see whether there are any questions. And Jackie, if you want to talk more about the issue of getting a chance to have presentations or abstracts reviewed, then we can talk about that as well. But yeah, I would love to say to you, enjoy every presentation. And some people will, but some people it's just unrealistic to say, I'm going to love every minute of this because it's stressful. But think about the more delayed gratification. Think about the satisfaction of sharing that piece of work so that that piece of work can then make a difference. So I think trying to remember that, there's a different kind of enjoyment there. There's a bit more, a bit more delayed. So there is a kind of phrase that we use sometimes, which is fake it till you make it, which means just pretend. You may not feel like a good presenter, but just put yourself out there and do it, okay? And accept the nerves, accept the stress, because there's a bigger reason you're doing it. So I would wish you all the best of luck with that, and I hope your abstracts get accepted. And yes, so I will just now unshare my screen and come back to the main group. I think that's back. So yes, Jackie, is there anything else that you wanted to share? We could go to the discussion maybe. Yeah, so it's not just in my control.
I'd like to hear if anybody else out there has questions. I have several comments, but I'd like to get feedback from other people that are listening. If you have comments, you can either type them into the chat line if you scroll to the top of your screen, there's a menu that, oh, I'm sorry. If you go to the bottom of the screen, there's a chat line that you can type questions in, or if you have a microphone and want to ask questions orally, that's fine too. Okay, while people are thinking of questions, I did have a couple of things I wanted to comment on. Before the presentation started, Cathy and I were talking about issues with language because the World Congress and most of the professional conferences are in English. And as a reviewer for papers, I've gotten a lot of papers where they use colloquialisms or slang terms, or even terms that they might hear off of a television in English, and those are not scientific terms. So Cathy and I had talked that we'd like to make available through our research group within the IPT-HOPE that if people have a different language and they'd like to have us review their abstract before they submit it or their presentation before they present it, that we could get people from our network to come together and review it to help people out. So that's something that we'll be developing within the next, few months. Do you have a comment about that, Cathy?
I think it's really valuable. As I was saying in the main presentation bit, I think there's sometimes as much danger for people who are native English speakers, especially when presenting, to be very unclear because they make assumptions that their accents are easy to understand. And I get very frustrated with that at conferences. But when it comes to getting your abstract accepted, and when it comes to the written word, I definitely think that sometimes people who have English as a second language can have a more uphill battle. And I feel very bad about that. I think it's an immense privilege to have as your first language the one that is used. It speeds things up for you. It's something I do not take for granted. I'm married to someone who is Indian, and I still look at certain things, even though he's a lecturer, he still makes certain writing mistakes because of the way in which his language is constructed and the way in which English is. And so I feel very strongly that we should be facilitating, because it's not about intelligence, it's not about ability, and it's not about quality of work. It's about language, very specifically. So yes, I'd really like to facilitate that.
Okay, that's something we can do within our network. A couple of the other comments I had, when I was first learning to be a clinician, which was back in the late 80s, a little while ago, I had gone to a conference to help prepare people who were clinicians to become teachers and effective teachers and presenters. And the things that I remembered from that conference that still stick in my mind is that you are your main audio visual. So it's important that people can see you and understand you. And then according to the slides, pictures really do portray more of the information. Charts are really good too if you have charts that show changes over time, or if you have a lot of data and you want to highlight some of the data for your reviewers. I was also told only 7 words per line and only 7 lines per slide. And on that note, since you're the main audio visual and the person is just looking at your slides for a visual prompt, you should only have the key words there that you're going to talk about and then explain the key words, and that helps people understand it and learn it without being overwhelmed with too many words. Any comments about that?
I think that's really valid. I think sometimes when we teach, we forget our own strategies and advice. And when I get to a presentation, I am more careful often. But if I went back through some of my teaching sessions, I think I'd probably be quite critical, because I think those are very important things to remember. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. The other thing that they did for us at this seminar was that they filmed us doing a 10-minute presentation. And everyone got something different out of it, but as a PT, because there was a lot of different healthcare professionals there, the thing that mortified me was my posture. I was standing up there with my shoulders hunched over, you know, sort of crooked and bent, sort of in a standing fetal position because it was embarrassing to, or you know, stressful to present. And after I saw how bad my posture was, I realized that I was not making my audience comfortable, that I needed to stand up, be calm, and if I was confident in myself, then I made other people confident that they could answer or ask questions, and it would be a fair, equitable dialogue and exchange where people were learning things. So my comment is, if you're a new presenter, have somebody film you, and then you can critically look at what you're doing and make corrections with your timing, your speed, your slides, and even your posture and breathing. Any comments about that, Kathy?
I totally agree, and it's so much easier now when so many people have smartphones to do that. I think I often advise that when students are learning how to do, for example, qualitative research, because you don't know how you sound, you don't know how you come across. And I would agree that we tend to be a little bit horrified sometimes when we see ourselves, and it's definitely one of the biggest teaching experiences if you can put yourself out of your comfort zone. And I think one way of making yourself do that is saying, well, I'm going to be doing this anyway, so I might as well know now, and then I can do something about it. I think fidgeting is another thing. The same experience I had as a public speaker watching. She said, I was actually scared you were going to fall over because I kept standing on one foot and fidgeting. And I had not noticed that as a habit, but it was a discomfort thing. And yeah, I kept thinking about it. So yeah, there's some things that you do that you really don't realize. And nobody's going to tell you unless you give them permission. Yes.
Yes. Just two more quick things. One thing that I have my students do when they're putting a presentation together, I have them write everything down and put it in the notes page. And that's important because you don't miss some key concepts that you want to explain to your audience. And if they write everything down in the notes page, and if they practice it several times, they get to a point where they've got it internalized and memorized, and then they don't have to bring their notes or their notes page unless they need that for comfort. The other thing that's really good about having things word for word in your notes page is that I have my students then cut and paste the notes onto a piece of paper, and that begins their publication. Now, again, a publication is going to have more words than a oral presentation because you don't have the voice inflection or the body language to stress certain points. But at least it gives you the framework and the scientific structure for what you need to do as you move towards the publication. Any comments on that?
I think that's a great idea. Certainly where I work, if you are supported in any way to go to do a presentation, you are then expected to publish from it. And I personally feel no piece of work is complete until it's disseminated in a way that other people can search for it and get that more in-depth information. And just think, if someone's seen your poster and they've gone, oh, that's great, and they're waiting for that publication. So anything that's going to speed up that journey, and I feel that an abstract forms a beautiful outline for an article, because just as for the abstract I've said you need that nugget, that key message, in the same way you don't actually want to go beyond that key message for the article. You just provide more detail. So at each stage you're increasing the level of detail, but the key message and the logic and the connections in the argument stay the same. So I think that often you're right, it forms the kind of essay plan, which I think is really nice, that what you were saying about having that detail in the PowerPoint notes page, that does move them on with that, which is great.
Okay. And then the only other thing I wanted to add, in case people don't know this, is that some places you're able to send your poster, so this would be for a poster presentation, and they're creating cloth posters instead of paper, so you don't have to roll it up and carry it in a tube. You can just fold it up and put it in your travel bag. So just so people know, for ease of traveling, especially going through airports nowadays, there are places that will make the fold-up posters out of cloth, and then they're easier to carry.
I had never heard of that. That is amazing. I would imagine it's a lot easier to stick it to the poster board. Because it doesn't try to roll back up on you.
Right. Yep.
So I'm going to remember that. I'm hoping that's not just the US. I'll have to make sure that I find somewhere in the UK that does it too.
Yeah, I don't know. I know our university, they do cloth posters. So
that is good. It's really good.
And those are my only comments. Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to make comments? Well, if not, Kathy, do you want to type your contact information in on the chat line, and then people will have that if they have any questions for you?
So, sorry. So just, it's in the chat underneath. That's my email address.
Yep.
But you can find me just through searching, Googling as well.
Or going on the IPT website.
Yes, absolutely.
So, Nina, I don't know if she's one of the audience today, but of course we want to thank you so much for your presentation. I thought what I really appreciated about it is that not only is it quite useful, but you presented the scientific structure as well as personal reflections and experiences to give us a more in-depth understanding of what we're about to do. Again, I wanted to make sure everyone knows that this recording will be up on the IPT-HOPE website, so people can access it at a later time. And then we will be presenting Kathy with an International Scholar Award, her second, as a thank you for spending the time to put this together and educate and bring information to the forefront for everyone. So I thank you kindly for everything, and I always enjoy talking to you and learning from what you have to say.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Okay.
You have a good evening. Oh, well, the rest of the day anyway. Evening for me.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thanks again, Kathy. We applaud you. This was great.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.